Hi, guys. We're live. And thank you so much for being with us tonight. And we have with us Miss Nikki G Speaks. And I'm just so excited to have her with me tonight. And y'all, we are in for a really great discussion about spiritual abuse. We're going to understand what spiritual abuse is. But first, I want to introduce her to you guys. And here we go. Nikki G is a life coach and advanced certified trauma recovery coach in training who helps survivors recover and thrive after narcissistic abuse, religious trauma, spiritual abuse, and cult involvement, high demand groups. She is also a survivor of multiple narcissistic relationships, religious trauma, as well as a former member of multiple cultic communities. Nikki is the CEO of Nikki G Speaks, LLC, which exists to support survivors with individual coaching services, online courses, and other various forms of psychoeducation related to religious trauma, narcissistic abuse, and cult involvement. She educates and empowers survivors to reclaim their lives and embrace the journey to come home to self, come back home to self. She sits on the board of directors for a nonprofit organization called Tears of Eden, which supports survivors who have experienced abuse in the evangelistical community. Nikki is a mentor of the IAOTRC, where she is co-facilitator of a religious trauma cohort group for coaches. She is also a member of the ICSA, where she keeps abreast of the latest information regarding spiritual abuse, cults, and how trauma and abuse affects survivors. She's currently host bi-weekly speaking events on the social app Clubhouse in her club, Spiritual Abuse and Cults. You can find her on IG at Nikki G Speaks and www.nikkiggspeaks.com. So, guys, welcome Nikki G Speaks, and we're so
Thank
happy she
you.
is with us. God bless you.
You too.
God
So
bless
pretty.
you. Thank you. You're beautiful also. So, oh, Nikki, you and I met last year,
hmm
and I was in your room, and you were talking about spiritual abuse and the different things that you have gone through in your life. And, we've heard about different types of, religious groups that kind of take advantage of people.
hmm
But you never, it's very seldom that you meet someone who has gone through the different types of trauma that you've gone through. And so
hmm
I really appreciate you being here with me today. And so welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for all the work that you're doing with your podcast and just, getting the word out there to help people on this planet connect, with each other to thrive and have a relationship with a God. So thank you so much for what you're doing, Bridget.
Well, you're so welcome. And I really enjoy your clubhouse rooms because you bring on different people who
hmm
talk about different types of spiritual abuse as
hmm
well as narcissistic abuse.
Right,
And
right.
we have also discussed that a lot of people who are in these positions in the spiritual leaders, they are also narcissists,
hmm hmm
and that we find that a lot. So tonight we're going to discuss what we need to look out for when we're thinking about joining different organizations and
hmm
churches,
hmm
just for us not to get wrapped up. So I
Yeah.
have some questions for you.
Come on. I might have to look at my notes, but let's go.
Okay. Well, here we go. So the first one I have for you is, what is spiritual abuse?
Okay, I'm going to use the working definition that we use in the religious cohort group that I'm a part of with the International Association for Trauma and Recovery Coaches. And I'll give you the definition and I'll give a little disclaimer. Spiritual abuse involves coercion, control, or exploitation by another person in a spiritual context. It can come from a faith leader, or a partner who uses spiritual or religious beliefs or doctrine to exert power and control over you. Spiritual abuse can involve verbal, emotional, sexual, physical, and even financial violence. And so I like to preface it with this. There's spiritual abuse is very nuanced, and there are a lot of different working definitions. It's a new thing in the trauma world where people are starting to have language around this sort of abuse. And I'm glad the temperature is being turned up as far as awareness and education and recovery tools. But sometimes you may hear people refer to religious abuse, spiritual abuse, and people can think of it two different ways. Neither way is right or wrong. It's basically what people's preferences are. So some people think, well, religious abuse is abuse that takes place in organized religion arenas, from Christianity to synagogues, churches, mosques, things of that nature. And people think spiritual abuse, well, that occurs when it's outside of those organized religions, like the yoga community or psychedelic community or things of that nature. But in and of itself, whichever lane people use to describe it, spiritual abuse, it hits your core, the core of who you are. It hits your spirit, and it's an insidious, a covert, subtle abuse that most people, when they're going through it, they really don't know that that's what's happening. Just like narcissistic abuse, you don't see it. There's no physical scars. They're mostly psychological, emotional, and spiritual. So I'll just start off with that and say that that's the definition.
Okay, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
So my next question for you, what is the difference between church hurt and
Okay.
spiritual abuse? Now that's a really good one.
Yeah.
That's a really
Well,
good
and when I speak to kind of different types of communities, all different races, but my heart is always with my people and who I am and the experiences I've encountered. Encountered a lot of spiritual abuse
one.
in Black communities, in non-denominational white communities, and in cultic communities. So the rainbow dynamic I've had with all different flavors and colors. But um, I say church hurt because a lot of times when it comes to abuse in our communities, I find that people use church hurt kind of as a way to bypass what it could possibly be. I
Okay.
look at spiritual abuse as being on a spectrum, just like with narcissistic abuse. The low level could be, people having experiences where are experiencing church hurt. And I don't want to belittle those experiences because they're real. We feel emotional pain about it, sometimes maybe a little psychological pain about it. And with those type of experiences, let's say if you and I were going to church
Mhm.
together and you wanted to, I told you, hey, Bridget, I really want to be the leader of the worship team. And, I really think God's calling me to do it. Next thing I know, you find a way to go pursue that position and you didn't tell me anything. And I find out that you got the position. So now I'm a little
Wow.
tight, right?
Yeah,
Now
now
when
I've experienced that type.
yeah. Hmm. So now
Yeah.
when I see you, I feel a little, I kind of distance myself from you. When I'm home, I get in my prayer closet. I'm like, God, help me to forgive Bridget because she knew, and again, I'm not belittling those experiences. It makes you feel some type of way. Those type of things, somebody taking your part, somebody not speaking to you in the church, if it's hit or miss, that's what I call church hurt.
Okay.
But what is the issue is people are actually experiencing deep spiritual abuse and trauma in a lot of church communities, and
Okay.
they're labeling it as it's just a little church hurt. I went through a little church hurt in that church. I'll be okay. I want to endure as a good soldier. God's got my back. I'm going to turn the page, turn the other cheek. It's just church hurt. You're going to find church hurt everywhere. But actually, what they've been experiencing is actually spiritual abuse.
Wow.
Hmm.
Okay, we're gonna have to go a little bit deeper.
Go ahead. You can ask more than what we planned, but go ahead if you have a
Okay.
question.
Well, um, growing up in the church, it's always something.
Yep.
Somebody
Hmm. Hmm.
so
Hmm.
somebody gonna say something that you don't
Hmm.
like,
Right.
Somebody gonna look at you crazy when you walk in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Somebody gonna say, "Oh, you're not good at being with the children's ministry."
Right. Right.
So, to me, now that I'm older,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think of it like I did when I was younger. When I was
Mm-hmm.
younger, it really hurt me. You know, I
Yeah.
was really torn up.
Yeah.
But as I've gotten older, I look at it like, you know what? That's just petty stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And people are people. They
Yeah.
it don't matter if they're in the church or if they're at work.
Right. Right.
People are people.
Right.
So tell me, how should we handle if we're at in a church
Mm-hmm.
and we find that there are cliques in churches and people
Mm-hmm.
talking about each other and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. So
Mm-hmm.
how should we handle that? Is that spiritual abuse or is that just people?
Well, I think those can be, perhaps turn into being toxic type of relationships
Hmm.
with individuals. That doesn't necessarily mean that the church environment is spiritually abusive, or because a person can experience spiritual abuse from the leadership. They can
Okay.
also experience it from people who are in the pews with them.
Okay.
But a lot of spiritual abuse has the power dynamics where one is trying to leverage power over the other.
Okay.
And when you get an environment where, let's say, the leadership is spiritually abusing the congregation, most likely the congregation will try to survive in that environment by spiritually abusing each other. So
Hmm.
it's a nasty dynamic, but it actually happens. And the reason why is because they say as it goes on the head all the way down. That's one aspect you can look at it, but the other reason is people are trying to survive. So if I don't want pastor so and so to call me out on Sunday morning prayer time, then if I knew Bridget was doing something she shouldn't have been doing,
Hmm.
I'm going to run and tell pastor. I'm going to run and tell the worship leader. I'm going
Yeah.
to tell, the spiritual mother, so that, then they can look at me and they will lay off of me and they'll go off of Bridget. And then maybe they'll look at me like, Nikki's really discerning. She's picking up things that are going on. And next thing you know, my position is getting higher and higher. It's
Oh,
not a good dynamic, but if
no,
people
it's
can look
not.
at it, it's not a good dynamic. But go ahead.
It's not. It's not. You know, I'm laughing because I can see it. I see
Mm-hmm.
it so well. I
Mm-hmm.
remember one
Mm-hmm.
church. My husband and I, we moved around a lot, so we've had the opportunity to go to a lot of different ministries. For
Mm-hmm.
his job, we moved around, and
Mm-hmm.
I remember so well. They had this one elderly lady that they had put in charge of being the head of the tea. She
Mhm,
was ahead of the tea committee,
mhm,
and she had so many people bashing her. So they went to the first lady, and they told the first lady how horrible this lady was. Do you know the first lady got on the phone with everybody in the room and just blasted this little lady out,
whoa,
and she was so hurt.
mhm, mhm.
That's horrible.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
It's
And
like, what?
right, and outside of the context of spiritual abuse, but just on a humane level,
Yes.
and it's not just in churches. I think this is a societal problem. We don't really treat people how we want them to treat us. We
Mhm.
don't really think about what we're doing. A lot of times when people get in group dynamics, and like I said, it's not just in the church. I've seen it on Clubhouse. I've seen it in other meetings and organizations. People will start to figure out what they can do, how they can perform, how they can tell on one person so that they can get elevated to the next level. How can they survive? How can they get close to the leadership? And a lot
Mhm.
of these desires are deep within people, and they have not possibly uh, admitted that to themselves. And so it's this inner child desire to be
Mhm.
seen, to be validated, to be honored, that
Mhm.
as adults we get in groups and these dynamics start to happen, even in churches.
All right. This
Hmm.
is such an important conversation that we're
Hmm.
having
Hmm.
because so many people have been hurt. Because I think about this little lady who was just doing all she could do to make
Hmm.
the tea so
Hmm.
nice and then to be blasted out. in front of everybody.
Right. Right.
And
And
so it made me question the first lady.
yeah.
It's like, how could she do that?
Hmm. But you mentioned clicks, and I'm not trying to what's the word? I'm not trying to um speak ill will about anybody. I'm not talking about that scenario. But that dynamic that you described and the dynamic that I'm talking about when people get in groups, it's really childlike behavior.
Hmm.
It's amazing how when we're adults, the inner child needs that were not, fulfilled when we were children, they will just show up a lot of
Hmm.
times in group dynamics. So it's like, we don't like how she's pouring the tea or serving the tea, so we're gonna
Hmm.
go and run and tell. You see when you step out of it, it's like, and people have been experiencing a lot of situations like that. It starts to get abusive later down the line, and I'll give some keys to what that looks like.
Yeah,
But yeah.
but I felt at that point it had became abusive
Okay.
because she was called out.
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
was embarrassed
Yes.
and she was told, I'm getting calls on you about this, this, and this, but it wasn't
Hmm.
in private, it was in public.
Oh yeah. That's one of the things on the list to describe, what a spiritual abusive environment looks like. And that is one of the things. Public humiliation is often in these type of environments, from on the microphone in front of the church. I've been a part of a community long time ago where we had, like once a month, public share of our wounds and the jealousies we had of other people and
Wow.
people we couldn't stand, and we had to go cry out to God to help us to love them and things of that nature. You say all this on the microphone, it's so not right. But at that time, I was in my early 20s. I didn't understand. I thought this was the way to godliness. So,
Man.
hmm.
Oh. So we're really talking about some deep stuff right now.
Oh yeah, oh
Because
yeah.
it's bringing up stuff in me right now.
Okay.
And I think it's necessary
Hmm.
because we can have and we can hold on to things
Hmm.
that are not real.
Hmm. Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
we have made ourselves believe that we're something that we're not based
Right.
on what
Right.
someone else has said or done to us.
Hmm. That's an amazing point, Bridget. We believe that we're something that we're not. We believe that we're unlovable. We believe that God doesn't care or love us. We
Hmm.
believe that we're never enough. And that the shame says, the voice of shame tells us that we're not enough, that we'll never measure up, we'll never please God, we'll never please the leadership, we'll always be in the back of the line. And that type of language again goes all the way back to childhood for some of us. If it we heard those words in childhood, and we go into a group dynamic, a church, a community, we hear it in those environments as well too. It's so ingrained in our
It
being
is. It
that
is.
it's hard for us to love ourselves. That's why in the bio and on my website, coming home to self is a real thing for me. I want to help survivors find themselves back here, where they can love themselves, where they can look inside and say it's not dark, it's not dirty, it's not nasty, it's beautiful. Hmm.
Amen.
Hmm.
Amen. Well, we're gonna move to the next question because we
Okay.
can stay on that
Oh
one
yeah, part
forever.
2 and part 3. Hmm.
Characteristics of a spiritual abuse or
Hmm.
spiritual abusive environment. What are the characteristics?
Okay. There's so many, but I kind of try to pull out some that I see typically in a lot of environments, but in a lot of times, a lot of the Black communities and the groups and churches and organizations. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are some important ones that I pulled out.
Okay.
The leaders, the spiritual abusive leaders, they like to promote themselves and highlight the fact that they've been given divine authority by God to do and say what they're doing. They don't allow questioning, constructive criticism, getting an understanding. They just expect you to obey God, and they use the scripture about submitting to those who are over you so they can watch over your soul. The way they teach the messages and prophesy these words it almost seems like they're synonymous with God. And this is
Mhm.
why when people come out of these abusive places, I don't like when people say, well, that's your fault. You should have known that that was man and that was God. You don't put man over God. I understand that context, but the way things are preached and exemplified, people think, well, if I displease my leader, I'm displeasing God. If I don't obey what my leader says, then I'm not obeying God. And what happens when the leaders use that position of authority and they ask you to do the unthinkable? I'm not going to explain what that is, but you know what I mean. Many
I
people have
understand.
gone through that by the leaders making it seem through dreams, through visions, through prophecy. Thus
Mhm.
saith the Lord, don't marry that person. You're supposed to be with this person. I've had so many friends, families just split apart because the leader said, the spiritual parent said, the spiritual mother, the intercessor of the house. And it's hard for people to separate. They use gaslighting, they use fear, public humiliation, shame, guilt to continue the abuse and to keep people feeling like I can never leave. If I leave this community, I'm leaving God. If I stay, I'm pleasing God and I'm suffering for Christ. They twist the scriptures. They teach on topics and scriptures and messages that help you to deny your flesh, to submit and obey to your leaders, to surrender to God. They highlight those more to get people psychologically defending that they should, be up under the leadership this way. They discourage you from visiting other churches, other ministries, conferences, things of that nature. They'll say stuff like, oh, well, if you go to that church, the devil's going to seduce you and you're not going to live on fire for God like you used to. If they find out you're visiting other places, then you're on punishment, so to speak.
Yes.
They strip away your autonomy and
Mhm.
your personal agency and your choice and make you believe that you're supposed to submit your whole life over to them. So if you want to make a career change, you got to get their permission. If you want to talk, if you want to marry somebody, you got to get their permission. If you want to go down the street, if you want to wear red nail polish, and I'm not saying that to be funny. I've had friends who've gone through spiritual abuse and it's been that invasive. And obviously, if you are not submitting to all of this or the spiritual covering, they tell you you're out of the will of God. You're out of alignment. Um, you have to ask permission. Even the money, they want more money for the building fund, money for the pastor anniversary, money for the pastor going and celebrating 5 years in the ministry and things of that nature. And so and here's another one. They will label particularly women, particularly single women, but not just, someone having a Jezebel spirit who is
Mhm.
not obedient to the flow of the house and to the leadership. And they will say you're Jezebel. They'll say for men, they'll say you're Ahab if you're not listening, if you're not obeying, if you're not following the rules and the order. These are just some things that these type of abusive leaders will use in order to make you believe, psychologically believe, that this is what God wants.
And you're right. You are right because even talking about it now, I'm like, oh Lord, I'm about to get struck down. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm,
It's
mhm.
crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah, a lot of these leaders, and you said it in the beginning when we tried to go live the first time, I think, um, or maybe just now, about the narcissism.
Mhm.
A lot of these spiritually abusive leaders have high level traits of narcissism, if not the pathology itself, if not the actual disorder itself. They are basically they get a high being
Mhm.
able to use the congregation and the members. They're supposed to be serving the members. They use the
Mhm.
members to serve them. They use
You're
the
right.
members to get their ministry big and their ministry worldwide instead of serving the needs of the people that are coming in.
You're right.
And it's
It's
terrible.
sad.
It is
It's
sad.
terrible.
Hmm.
one city we lived in, the pastor, they had people come in and clean their houses, and like, don't pay them.
Yes.
And it's like, well, the Lord put it on their heart to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned that because that's another one. Free labor. It's one thing to say, I'm going to go and do something for the church.
Hmm. Yeah.
Voluntarily. You want to go do something. You want to clean something up. You want to whatever. But when it is kind of mandated and
Hmm.
using scriptures behind that to get free labor from people, it's not okay, and it's abusive. And many people are going through a lot of this in churches,
Hmm.
and they've labeled it just as church hurt. When it's church hurt, you're more prone to endure and pray through it and get through it. But when we really call it what it is, abuse,
It
abusive
is.
practice, perhaps you will say, wait a minute now. Why would we want to stay in abusive relationships? So defining it is very important.
And it's generational.
Yes, yes.
Because a lot of these pastors and preachers, they're second generation,
Mm-hmm.
third
Mm-hmm.
generation. So they've seen their parents
Yep.
live this lifestyle. So
Mm-hmm.
they're just keeping this going.
Yep.
And then the people in the congregation, they're generational.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
they've seen their parents take all kinds of different
Yes.
abuse. So they're taking it also.
Mm-hmm.
So where
Yes.
do we, where does it stop? Where does it stop?
It
And
stopped.
so this is so important that this conversation is had.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'm going to be liked by too many people right now.
It's okay. Come
I
join me.
know
But
because
go
people
ahead.
don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it.
And specifically talking about our people,
Mhm.
okay, who I love. And this is not coming from a place of judgment. It's coming from a place of observation. You just
Mhm.
asked, how do we break this pattern? How do we break these cycles? We talk about generational curses a lot, generational blessings. And when I was in a lot of these environments, man, I had my whole list. I break this generational curse, break this, break this, break this. I
Mhm.
prayed and fasted and all that stuff. And I'm not saying God didn't use any of that to where I am right now.
Mhm.
But the cycles started to break as I started to see
Mhm.
for what it really was. And you can't heal something you don't acknowledge. You can't acknowledge something that you don't see. This
Amen.
is why I'm really passionate about having rooms on Clubhouse. The work that I do is to help educate survivors so we can start to distinguish, because you're right. Generationally, we've been programmed to endure this, to
Mhm.
not complain, to just think, well, we're going to suffer for Christ on this side of glory. And when we get up there, we'll get our reward. Why can't we get our reward now? Why are
Yeah.
we the only people that don't get our reward? Why do we have to wait till then and everybody else? See, I'm starting a whole nother conversation, but I don't believe that God's heart is saying, Black community, I want you just to keep on enduring abuse. I want you to keep abusing each other. Then you'll be okay and you can enjoy life when you get to heaven.
No.
That doesn't sound right. That doesn't
No.
sound like God either.
That doesn't sound like God.
And because you made the point, this pastor saw his father and his grandfather and his great great grandfather pastor this way, lead the flock this way. So why would he question anything? But
Mhm.
I believe the stories of abuse and the traumatic effects that a survivor goes through, the volume level is turning up now. And this is kind of what I would like to see for our people. We have this ability, and it's a trauma response, to hold all of the pain, all
Mhm.
of the suffering and abuse, and we do this. I'm not going to tell nobody because number one, we think is gossip. I'm just going to keep it to myself. I'm going to just put on nice makeup and smile, and I'm going to shout, and God's going to be the only one to know why I'm doing this.
Yep.
But it's time for the church to rip the tape off and the
Mhm.
stories to come forward,
That's right.
because that energy is bondage on the inside of us and it's not okay.
No,
So,
it's
how
not
do we
okay.
break it? We do things like we're doing right now.
Yeah, and it's just like domestic violence.
It
You know, when
is.
When God called me to help women, people who go through domestic violence, to be a voice for them,
Yes.
I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't thinking that also spiritual abuse
Yeah.
is part of this.
Absolutely.
Anything that keeps us quiet,
Mm-hmm.
don't talk about it. What
Mm-hmm.
goes on in this house stays in this house.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's not of God.
Nope. Nope. And
And why
there's
do I have to suffer?
right.
Why do I
Right.
have to give all my money and
Mm-hmm.
time
Mm-hmm.
and I have to find a ride to get to church?
Uh-oh. See, now you're getting specific. I remember those stories.
It's something
Mm-hmm.
wrong with that.
Right.
And I
Right.
don't understand why the leaders are not seeing that themselves.
Mm-hmm.
We have people in the congregation that don't have,
Right.
and they're paying their tithes. And when they
Mm-hmm.
need something, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, don't come to me, don't come to the
Right.
church.
Right.
We ain't got no money to help you. But you wasn't saying that every Sunday I gave
Mm-hmm.
money for
Mm-hmm.
10 years.
Mm-hmm. There needs to be a whole overhaul, a whole
Yeah.
shifting, and an understanding that this is not okay to
No, it's
take
not
to take something that is sacred to so many, which is the Bible, which is their faith, and you merge it with psychological abuse and emotional abuse, sometimes sexual and physical, like you mentioned, and you merge that together. What it feels like to a survivor, at least this is how I used to describe it for what I went through. It felt like somebody took a machete and cut the umbilical cord that I had between me and God. That's what it feels like. And moms out there, if you had a baby and they cut the umbilical cord, there's no restitching that back. How does a person walk on with their life and not basically throw in the towel? And many survivors have contemplated suicide because this is an abuse that a lot of people don't understand, but it
okay.
goes right to the core of our being, and it takes years to get
Yeah.
back to where you need to be, not where you were, but where you need to be. I am
Where you
still
need to be.
recovering. I am still recovering, but I'm grateful that those years of my life, the page has turned, and now I get to write my story. It's not in the
Wow.
hands of a spiritual abuser in the pews or in the pulpit or a narcissist. They no longer have the pen to my life book. It's between me and my creator. It's no longer between me and all these other people, but the abuse needs to be seen and understood and acknowledged so we can go on and get the freedom we need.
Amen.
Hmm.
Amen. And
Hmm.
guys, we're not saying that all of the leaders that we
Oh,
have
yeah. Hmm.
are abusers,
Hmm.
but there are so many people, and we have to recognize who's really for us and who's not for us. You know, on Clubhouse, you'll go in a room, and the first thing you see in there is a cash app,
Hmm.
and you
Hmm.
ain't leaving that room until you put money in that cash app. And it's like they have people who are designated, oh, we're gonna sow into what? What
Hmm.
what did you do that special
Yeah.
that we have to sow into
Hmm.
500, $1,000?
But a lot of that is, like I said earlier, to prop up the leaders, to fulfill the leaders' desires, to be worshipped, to be adored, to have the members feed the leaders. And that's almost like, as crazy it would sound, if a parent has a child and they have children, why should the children at 3 or 4 years old go in the kitchen and cook dinner for their parents? Should they be
Mm-hmm.
the ones to go and take their clothes and wash them? That sounds crazy, right? But that's basically what the leaders are doing in a lot of these churches. They're looking for the members
To
to
take care of
feed the shepherd when the shepherd is supposed to be feeding the sheep. It's out of order. And
them.
I
Amen.
think because so many voices have been silent, and
Mm-hmm.
I understand why, we've been taught to endure and to bear it. We think that if we speak out, it's considered gossip. We think that if we, and that's any form of abuse. If I tell what's going to happen to me, how is the church going to look at me? What are people going to say? Everybody's going to walk away. But the more stories come out and the more people speak out, more awareness can come. More awareness can come, and then people can actually perhaps be in environments and in churches where this is not happening. Like you said, it's not happening at all, but it's happening in too many.
It
And we
is.
got to do something.
It is. And I think the pandemic, you know,
Yes.
it helped us understand really what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because when we couldn't go to any church,
Come on.
God was still taking care of us.
That's right. That's right. And I think the pandemic kind of unearthed a lot of silent voices, and people started to step back and say, wait a minute now. How come
Hmm.
I feel lighter not in church than I was when I was there? I was depressed going in, depressed coming out. I felt weary and tired and exhausted because I was at, Tuesday night Bible study, Wednesday night choir rehearsal, Friday night prayer, Sunday 3 services. Now that I can't go, I'm actually having a real connection with God because now I have time for him.
That's
And
right.
so people started to say, this is different. What's going on? This doesn't make sense. So I think a lot of people during the pandemic time have really started to learn more about spiritual abuse, search it out, research so they can understand even more what they've been through.
Amen. Amen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're moving on to the next question. What are some places or types of relationships that spiritual abuse can occur?
Well, we've been talking mostly about the church, so we know that it can happen in religious communities, the church, like I said earlier, synagogues, mosques, any type of religious or spiritual community, anywhere where a group. And I'm a former 5 times over cult member, so I let people know straight off the bat. Like people say, oh, well, this person joined a cult. I said, nobody just joins a cult. Nobody just joins a spiritually abusive community. Nobody just joins a relationship with a narcissist. We go in believing what is presented to us. And
Hmm.
usually there's love bombing, there's prophetic words if it's in a church community. With the narcissist, it's, oh my gosh, I never met anybody like you. You're so this, you're so that. We go off of the presentation, and later on we start to see, oh boy, what am I in and what did I do? So they're in those type of communities. They're in families of origin. A lot of spiritual abuse starts in the developmental stages in childhood.
Hmm.
Some families, if the parents are spiritually abusive themselves, meaning they take the context, they take the teachings, and they use it to get their child to do this, to get their child to do that, instead of giving the child understanding and choice, this
Hmm.
happens. And so a lot of children, teenagers, are abused in their own homes. So it's not even that they get it at the church, they get it at the church and then they have to come home, and mama and papa are using the same teaching and messages to abuse their children. Obviously, marriages, romantic partnerships, the husband will use the scriptures that the wife is supposed to submit to the husband. They'll use the scriptures when it's time for the sexual intimacy to give reason as to why the wife should be involved in it, whether she wants to or not. A lot of leverage power dynamics. This is what I'm saying. Before it even gets to the church, it's actually in the home. And then if the wife wants to speak up and tell the leadership, if the leadership has the same mindset, she's going to be ridiculed and shamed, and he will be protected and honored and possibly promoted. Um, Also, it can take place in therapeutic dynamics with different therapists, coaches, Christian counselors. If their mentality and their ideology is one that's very abusive, they will take that relationship and use that power dynamic. And I went through that with a Christian counselor years ago. I was going through things with a cult leader. It didn't feel right in my body. I'm telling her, and she was like, well, what does the Bible say? You're just supposed to forgive. So everything was just bypassed and dismissed because she used the forgiveness model to just wipe it all away. So this can happen in a lot of different relationships that we're involved in.
Wow. And Usually, if like you said, so you went to a Christian therapist.
Christian counselor.
Okay.
Hmm.
So basically, she believed the same way you were
Yep.
being taught.
Yep.
So you don't get a different.
No. No. And I didn't see that at first. At first, it seemed like she heard what I was saying and she heard the different trauma effects I was talking about. But little did I know, she kept encouraging me to forgive and to return back to the environment.
Wow.
Forgive and return back. So now I'm confused because now I'm like, is it me? Is it the leadership? You know what? It's me. I need to pray more. I need to fast more. I'm going to go back because that's where God called me. He didn't tell me to go anywhere else. I'm just going to deal with this. But it was breaking me on the inside simultaneously. So, yeah.
So when you say cult,
Hmm.
can you talk to us about a cult?
Hmm. Well, it cults are groups where spiritual abuse actually takes place. And like I said earlier, people don't just join them. They they are connecting with the presentation. Just like a narcissistic relationship, a cult dynamic or environment is very similar to a spiritual abuse environment that I've been talking about. So you come
Okay.
in and you're like, wow, you may meet the leaders. The leaders take special attention with you and they're like, hi, and the last cult I was in and got out of like 8 years or so ago, I remember when I first started going there, not for the first few weeks, it was just like, oh, this is wow, the worship is amazing. And then the leader just started prophesying over me. And there's just something about when people hear prophecy, they just think, oh, the aura of God is all over this person. But
Hmm.
a lot of what I experienced with abuse had a lot to do with prophecy. And I did not understand how to weigh both of them together. How is someone who's supposed to be called by God and a prophetic voice prophesying accurate things that nobody else knew, but at the same time was spiritually abusing myself and other people in the congregation? A lot of times people think because they got that prophecy right and nobody else knew it, they got to be the man and woman of God. There's nothing wrong. So when they abuse you, you
Hmm.
dismiss it and say, it's just me. It's not them. Because they got that prophecy right. Nobody else knew that, only God. Or they had that encounter. They were in the spirit and they saw blah, 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 blah. I never had that experience. So it's
Hmm.
got to be me. And I stayed because it was mysterious. There was a charisma about the cult leader. There was this draw. And then I felt like I belong. I have a community. I have spiritual parents. This has to be where I'm supposed to be, until the abuse started coming in and the jealousy and the leveraging of power, like I was talking about earlier. But any place can turn cultish. On the job, in the church, in the government, any place can turn cultish where it's addictive and you feel like you have to be there, but you're being totally abused psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, and things of that nature.
You know, when you talk about cult, I think back to the 70s.
Hmm.
Remember Jim Jones?
Yes, yes,
Did
yes.
you do any studying on that as you?
Actually, a survivor of the Jim Jones cult actually popped in one of our rooms one time on Clubhouse. I
Oh
was
wow.
like, oh my goodness, she's an older woman now, but she sat in the room and she came up on stage, and I just was like, I am just so honored, and I could just hear strength in her. And most of the people who were part of that cult were black. I don't know if a
Yeah.
lot of people know that. And I'm glad you brought up that point because when it comes to cults, a lot of times in our communities,
Hmm.
we think if it doesn't look like Jim Jones, if it doesn't look like David Koresh, if it
Hmm.
doesn't look like Heaven's Gate or Scientology, then it can't be a cult.
Okay.
But that's not true. And I think the language of spiritual abuse, religious trauma, cults, us as a community, as people, need to understand it more because it can happen anywhere, with any race, with any on any part of the planet. It is not just this race that gets in cults or that race that gets in cults. We all can, and it's the vulnerabilities. If you have
Exactly.
a loss in your life, someone died, you want a greater relationship with spirituality or with God or your creator. if you are looking to belong, you feel rejected, isolated, and alone,
Mhm.
you just need community. You know, if you are a young person, young people like to make impact. They want purpose.
Mhm.
Where is the injustice on the planet? And let me run right into it.
Mhm.
So these type of groups that I'm mentioning, these are susceptibilities to how we can just get swept up in a cult. And our critical thinking skills start to wane, and that emotional connection, like, wow, I finally found my spiritual parents, because maybe my parents didn't, they neglected me. Now I got spiritual parents and they're calling me, they're hanging out with me,
Mhm.
they're listening to my troubles. This has to be God. And I'm not saying people that do that
Mhm.
are cult leaders or spiritual abusive people, but we have to pay attention that those things makes us even more vulnerable to being attracted to these type of people, and they can see it.
Amen.
They're like, that person doesn't know who they are. I can take advantage of them. That
Oh
person,
yeah.
has codependent tendencies. I can really, mess them up here.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And that happens in relationships with
Absolutely. Hmm.
narcissistic abuse and domestic violence.
Hmm.
You know, people, they seek out people who are either going through something where
Hmm.
they're not totally themselves,
Yep.
or very kind or empathetic, an empath,
Hmm.
and they know they can get to this person and cause them to do things they wouldn't normally do.
Right. 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 And again, education. And I'm not
Yeah.
talking about someone has to become a psychologist in order to get educated. There's a lot of resources out, at least about narcissism. There's so many narcissistic abuse, trauma informed, trauma responsive therapists and coaches and things of that nature. And I'm hoping that that will start to turn up the volume for religious trauma, spiritual abuse, and cults for our community. And sometimes it
Yes.
takes one that looks like us to bring the message to us so that we can be free. Because
Yeah.
if we're still in all of this and all of those experiences are trapped up in here, we're not experiencing freedom. We're experiencing the opposite of it. But sometimes
You're
we
right.
really just don't know.
And just having this discussion tonight, I,
Mm-hmm.
I feel different emotions in
Mm-hmm.
myself.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
feel, I'm happy that I'm able to talk about it, but I
Yeah.
also feel fear. You know, I
Mm-hmm.
feel this, oh wow,
Mm-hmm.
maybe I shouldn't have went this direction.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
what will people say? What
Right.
will,
Right.
you know, because that's part of my, upbringing, to be very cautious about the way
Mm-hmm.
you talk
Mm-hmm.
about certain things because
Right.
you'll be considered not part of us.
Right, right. And though that right there is what keeps us silent on any form of abuse within the church dynamic, the black community. It's ingrained in us even back to slavery days. Don't ask, don't tell. You keep the secrets. How many people find out in their 40s and 50s when they talk to grandma and great grandma and they tell the stories and I didn't know that. Why didn't you tell
Yeah,
me?
yeah,
They will take it to their grave if possible. And that is part of a trauma response within us as a people. But real freedom is going to come when we're able to rip the tape off our mouth.
yeah,
That because abuse, any type of trauma and abuse, it stills our voice. It shuts up
it
our
does.
voice. It creates dynamics where we feel shameful and fearful and things of that nature. But, you know, and the enablers who tell people, hey, shh, don't say anything.
Yeah,
Shh, don't say anything. And meanwhile, that trauma is also being passed down generationally and
you're
and
right.
even down to the DNA level. So our children and our children's children are carrying the weight of our silence. But it's not from a place of judgment that I say it. We didn't know any better. And for that matter, who do we tell when it comes to spiritual
Yeah,
abuse? When it's sexual abuse, or domestic violence, physical violence. Not that the cops can do a great job in that area, but at least you can pick up the phone
yeah,
and say, hey, you can go to the police precinct. When it's spiritual abuse, where do we go? Who do we go to? If you tell the leadership sometime, they will humiliate you, embarrass you, and kick you out. If you tell your loved ones who really love you, they may not understand. And
Mhm.
so they don't want to actually start looking
Mhm.
at the community either and saying, well,
No,
I don't want to see it. So,
no,
people start to treat you like you have leprosy. But
you're right.
I tell survivors when I teach on it, when I do support groups, listen, the best way, and this is with narcissism too, any type of abuse, connect with survivors who have been through what you've been through. It is important because there may be people right next to us that love us dearly, but they cannot fathom this type of abuse. They cannot fathom why it's 3, 4 years later and we're still crying in our bed. We're having flashbacks of the pastor prophesying over us in front of everybody and sharing our business, and he should have not done that. They're dealing with chronic PTSD, insomnia, seeing dreams that are like nightmares to some people, 4 and 5 years out, trying to pray, but you feel like you failed God, feel like you're not connected to God anymore. You don't even know how to look at the world because in a lot of these places, they teach that the world is evil, that therapists are no good. You only need to pray and fast, and you got to be in community, you got to be in alignment, and that's it. But when that's over, and you're
Yeah,
here, you don't know what to do. It's hard for survivors, but it's possible to heal and recover. It's going to take some time. It
yeah.
will. But if you don't give up on you, if you connect with the community, connect with people who speak this language. Not to so much put a plug in, but myself, a friend of mine, and two friends of mine, we started a Facebook group just a week ago called Surviving the Black Church. And
Yeah, I'm
it's
part of
open. Yes, you are. And we are not there necessarily to call out this leader and this community and this ministry. People do that and they have their places. The purpose of this group is for survivors like myself and like you and so many others who will see this to have a place and a space to express this is what I've been through, and they're not ridiculed. They're not given 20 scriptures to make them be quiet and never speak about it again. You're
that.
around people who understand. They're not going to call you crazy or sinful or demonic. So if it's something that interests people, go and find it on Facebook, Surviving the Black Church. We also will be rolling out a podcast soon. Involved,
Yay!
yes. So that will be interesting. We'll talk about a lot of these topics in more depth and to help equip people who are suffering in silence and feel like they're alone. Sorry,
And
that was a lot.
there's no so many of us, you know. I'm just getting brave enough to speak about stuff, you
Good
know.
for you. Good for
I
you.
am. I'm 57 years old, and I'm like, you know what?
Mm-hmm. It's time, right?
If I can't talk about it, if I can't stand up and use my voice to
Mm-hmm.
do whatever I feel like God is telling me to
Mm-hmm.
do, then
Mm-hmm.
there's something wrong with that.
But
You
isn't
know,
that the work of God anyway? To
oh
go
yeah,
after the broken, the hurt, the wounded? Aren't we supposed to
amen.
be doing that anyway? So
We
people
are.
that give you grief or try to say something or have an issue with this work, they need to really look at themselves
Yeah.
because there is hurt and woundedness and pain all over the planet,
Oh,
but it's also inside the church. And many people have exited the church for this very reason. It's not because they didn't want a relationship with
mhm,
God. It's not because they wanted to be a better person and,
mhm.
and love their family and their neighbors and love God as they love themselves. It's not that people didn't want to do it. The abuse, the trauma
Amen.
was intense and they had no place to find refuge, no one who can hear them and say, I believe you, I hear you, I'm sorry. Now, how can we help heal you? You don't hear too many voices saying that. So I honor you, Bridget, for taking a step in this direction to do this. I'm not a wonder, I'm not some healer, I'm just a survivor. And I've found a little rhythm to get myself up and to
Mhm.
allow my purpose to come forward to help other people who are walking on this path because I know it's hard, but you can recover.
Yes, you can. And I really, really appreciate you so much.
Yes.
And I know I'm going over your time.
Oh, it's okay.
You sure? Because I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
we
yeah, yeah,
have, okay, we got two more questions.
yeah. Okay.
Okay. What are some of the traumatic effects that a survivor,
Hmm.
um, did I not write it all out?
It's okay. The
You
survivor
have it
goes
on your
through. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Some of the, and I've named some already, but trauma disconnects us from our relationship with our creator, our
Hmm.
relationship with ourselves, and our relationship with other people.
Okay.
So it's the great disconnector. Part of recovery and healing from trauma, any form of trauma, is to start to come back home here. And a lot of people think, okay, I was abused spiritually, so I need to use spiritual practices to get better. I'm
Okay.
not discrediting that. I'm not saying that's wrong. But any type of abuse or trauma that we experience as human beings, the effects, the energy, it lays within our body. It lays within our nervous system. When our nervous system is dysregulated, all sorts of things can happen. When we're
Okay.
healing and recovering from spiritual abuse, we have to come back to our body. We have to, because did you ever, this might have happened tonight. I'm not sure. When we hear
Okay.
something and it elicits a response in us, and it's like, whoa, I felt that. You know,
Hmm.
our bodies respond. There's a physiological effect of, oh, when we're around someone that abused us and we go to a coffee shop and we find them, sometimes we start to shake because it's in our body. And
Hmm.
when we, like I said earlier, when we don't speak, that energy, that feeling that is in our body, and it wants to flow through us and flow
Hmm.
out of us. But when we
Okay.
don't process the trauma, it can get stuck in our body. The grief,
Hmm.
complex grief survivors go through, and that sometimes gets locked in our body. Hard to connect with God. Sometimes we're angry at Him. Why did you let this happen? I believe that this was a man and woman of God. I believe that this community was doing great things for you. Why did you let this happen, God? Mad at authority figures, mad at the community, the church, wrestling with that. A lot of depression and anxiety because now we're afraid. I don't know how to enter a new community. I don't know if I should enter a new community. Um, and triggers by mentioning anything spiritual. Some people are triggered just hearing scripture being recited. Some people are triggered by hearing somebody say, "Oh, God's giving you a purpose. You're going to be okay. Just get through it." Like that can trigger somebody.
Yeah, I've
Worship
seen that.
worship music is still a trigger for me. Uh,
Really?
yeah, when I went to go get my hair braided recently, the place I go, love them, beautiful people, but they blast the worship music, and a lot of it is what I listen to. That style of worship music when I was in a lot of the cultic communities I was in,
Okay.
and so I just have to put some earphones on, listen to something else, a teacher, a podcast, or whatever, because it just can bring back so many memories and overwhelm me. But I work through it. um, Fears of what happens, what's going to happen to me now that I've acknowledged that I've been spiritually abused. Is God still going to love me? What's going to happen to me in the afterlife? Am I ever going to be able to go into a community again? Feelings of loss and hopelessness and defeat, feeling like this is the end of my life. Not that we're ending our life, but there's nothing good. This is the last chapter. I'm going to feel like this forever. It feels like you're in a dark hallway that there is no sight, no end in sight, no light at the end of the tunnel. And this is what I'm talking about. People who are on the intercession team, worship leaders go through this. People who've been in seminary, people who've been called deliverance ministers and intercessors and prophetic voices, when they experience spiritual abuse, it's hard because they've been up here and people have looked, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Um, the loss of community really, really hurts because God made us to be able to connect with each
Hmm.
other. We're supposed to be sociable creatures. When we are
Hmm.
cut off from community and it's not voluntarily, it hurts. The shame
Yeah.
comes in. We think, what did I do? I'm not lovable. No one will love me again. And all these emotions, and then saying, who do I process this with? And I encourage people, find a good mental health professional. Um, find a mental health professional who, number one, has knowledge of what I'm talking about, who has
Mhm.
expertise of what I'm talking about. They don't necessarily have to have been a survivor themselves, but it helps a whole lot more if they can relate with you. But
Mhm.
someone who is trauma informed and trauma responsive. And just to just an addendum to that, a lot of times in church dynamics, we can have a tendency to spiritualize everything
Mhm.
and not have the natural humanity, spiritual and natural, come together on how we recover from things. I know people that say, well, you're just supposed to pray about everything, fast about everything, cast out whatever demon, and you'll be fine. It doesn't work that way. There are some people who have mental health disorders, who have psychological disorders, who have issues where they need medication. It's not the devil, it's not anti God. And
Yeah.
so some may feel, I want to get help, I want to get therapy, I want coaching, but isn't this wrong? Doesn't that mean the devil won? Aren't I outside of the will of God? And I say, no, he
No.
gave you a human body. You feel it in your body. You
Mhm.
feel it in your body. So that means you can pray and go to therapy.
Yeah.
You can go to therapy and fast. You can ask someone to pray and lift you up and get help. This is not something to bypass.
Amen.
This is not something to just put to the side and say, okay, I went through that for 3 years. I'm just gonna pretend like it didn't happen and I'll figure out my life. And I get it because we don't know
Mhm.
what else to do, but we're being eat up and on the inside.
Oh yeah.
And we need the freedom. We need the freedom, spirit, soul, mind, and body. And it is available, but we're going to have to roll up our sleeves, be patient with ourselves, be kind to ourselves, and really understand it's a journey, it's a process.
Yeah.
But on the other side, there's beauty. I am a witness. 5 coats in, spiritual abuse up the wazoo, and I'm not 100% healed, but I'm much better than I used to be, and I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah. I'm really so happy that you shared that with us because there's so many of us that have experienced spiritual abuse, church
Mhm.
hurt.
Mhm.
And we don't even realize sometimes what trauma
Come
is
on.
set up. I know I have anxiety and, I had panic attacks and
Mhm.
didn't know where it came from.
Mhm.
But we hold so much stuff in us.
Mhm.
And as I start seeking counseling and therapy,
Mhm.
I've been able to find out, where it started.
See,
And
that's
so
good.
many years we can hold all that stuff in thinking
Mhm.
we're handling it.
Mhm.
But our body is not. Our
Right.
body and our mind is not.
Right.
And then one day you wake up and you're in a panic
Yeah.
and everything is like all over the place and you're like, what is going on? What is
Mhm.
going on?
Mhm.
And so I had to take medication
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
order for my chemicals to, like, I
Balance
guess
out.
my yeah,
Mhm.
balance out.
Mhm.
It was no other way.
Mhm.
But my mind, it had got so bad for me
Right.
that
Right.
I was shaking going all the, driving to work. My
Mhm.
hands on the steering wheel. I was panicking.
Yep. It's real.
It's a real thing, guys.
Mhm.
It's real.
Hmm. And um, something that I had to learn, I think, over the past 3 or 4 years, there's a book called The Body Keeps the Score.
Hmm.
And it talks a lot about all that trauma, unprocessed, not worked through, can sometimes sit in our body and turn
Hmm.
into dis-ease, disease.
Yeah.
And I learned this, I don't want to say the hard way, but I learned this in a different way when I found myself back in 2020. All of these health issues came up, a couple of times. I don't know if I was still going to be on this planet because I lost so much blood and everything like that. I had to wind up having surgery to kind of save me. But I realized through that whole process, a lot of it was the trauma that I held on to. And I'll be open. I don't mind because I think this may help somebody,
Mhm.
especially us as females, especially us as Black women. We carry so much in our wombs. We carry
Mhm.
so much anguish from our own lives, our own generational history, then our families, then our church families, then our associations.
Mhm.
We have so much trauma compiled on top of each other. And when we don't learn to release, and you release, yes, you pray, that's a release. You journal, you jog, you run, you connect with nature, you dance, you release so those emotions can go to, through, and out of you. But I wasn't doing that. And I didn't realize what all of the grief, the complex grief, and all those abusive environments, all of that set in my womb. And in 2020, I had to get my womb removed. Now, some people may look at me, oh, you look like 20 years old. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, you do.
But, I found out when I was at my worst, my mom told me, well, all the women in our family on my mom's side lost their womb and at their age 40. And I was past 40, so I was a little bit further along than they were, but I had it the worst as far as all of the effects that happened to me, passing out, all the stuff like that. But when I was about to have the surgery and I was praying for it to go well, it's almost like as if I felt like this was going to break the curse this particular time. And my daughter was right there with me. And she prayed for me. And I didn't know she was seeing the same thing as she had her eyes closed. And I said, it's going to stop with me because I am teaching her how to release, how to let out the anguish, the pain, the grief, the loss, the uncertainties, the fears, as a people learning to release it out of our body. I am not discrediting church involvement. I'm not discrediting worshiping God. That is a form of release, but it's not the only one. And
Mhm.
as we as a people have to get that out of our bodies, because if not, I'm not trying to scare people. I'm just giving people an example of trauma. And my mom and my grandmother, my great grandmother, who you know, dealt with slavery, all of that trauma, not processed, kept going down the line. And I said, it stops with me. I'm going to understand my generational trauma, the developmental trauma in childhood, and now the spiritual abuse and religious trauma, so I can break this off of myself and my daughter's life. And that's what we need to do in our
That's
communities,
what we need to do.
you
That's
know?
what we need to do.
Mm-hmm,
That's
mm-hmm,
what we need to do.
mm-hmm.
That's what God is calling us to do.
That's right. That's right.
And our last question,
Mm-hmm.
if someone thinks they are involved in a spiritual abuse situation, what are the steps that they could take to get out?
Various steps. This is the hard part. I see some clients where they are in the position where they want to leave. Some have left and they're processing. It's a hard journey. Number one, it's your choice. At the end of the day, it's not my job to tell someone to leave, it's just to present the information. But when you get to the point and you say, okay, Nikki, Bridget, I've listened to all of this and I'm like, whoa, this is starting to raise some red flags in the community I've been in, or you may be listening to this and you were already at that point. You just needed
Mhm.
one more confirmation to say it's time for me to exit. Just like any type of abuse, physical abuse, domestic violence, sexual abuse, what would we tell someone if they were going through that and someone sexually abused them? Would we tell that person to go back and hang with that abuser? No,
No,
we wouldn't. But when it comes to spiritual abuse, just pray about it. God's
pray
gonna
about
God's gonna deal with them. You go back in there and show
it.
him that we push people towards it. Now, I'm not
Yeah.
talking about leaving your relationship with your faith or with God or your higher. I'm not talking about that. Some actually do after they've gone through this. Some actually do. Some say I have to come out of the environment and heal first, then I will see what my next step is, my
Mhm.
next community, because all the churches are not like this. But
No.
and so, first part, recognize this is what I've been through. I can no longer push it aside, deny it, spiritually bypass it. Because
Mhm.
when we do that, we're gaslighting ourselves. We're lying to ourselves
We
and
are.
saying, oh, this is not real. I'm just going to be okay. No, it's happening. And it has happened. And it's
Mhm.
happened to people in your family, and perhaps you're the one to actually start doing something about it. And it's okay to talk about it. So many are silent because somebody said it's sinful. Somebody said you're giving the enemy, you're operating in his playground if you're speaking up. No, speak up. Speak about it.
You're
I'm not
right.
saying some people may go to a microphone and tell somebody in the church this is what happened, but I'm talking about you acknowledging it and sharing it with a loved one, with a friend that you know will understand. Recovery, it's a process. It's not going to be in 2 seconds that this is going to be. And I had to do what I call taking my healing watch off my
Okay.
wrist and throwing it away. Because the first 2 years after I came out of all this and I really started doing some deep work, a lot of people I had to like move away from, or they walked out of my life because I wasn't healing fast enough for them. Oh,
Wow.
Nikki, you was an intercessor. You was this and that. Come on, what's going on? Like you ain't over it. It was just church hurt. Totally denied from family members to people who I consider my spiritual moms and things of that nature. And I could not heal that way. So I had to pull back even more so I could be real with myself and what I've been through. Um, Pausing attempts to return, perhaps pausing on your attempts to return to that particular spiritual abusive community or relationship. If you're married and your husband or your wife is spiritually abusing you, it's a little bit different. There are more channels, especially if you have children. That requires someone helping you walk through it, create a plan, and see how you can move through with that. But if it's a community, perhaps pausing on going back so you can actually catch the wind of what you've been through, seeing if you can get help and actually work through this. Now, I know when I say that, that's going to be hard for some people because we've been told don't forsake the assembling. We've been told, if you're out of the church, you're out of the will of God, and all of these scriptures that make us feel like we should not step back. But like that example, would you tell someone to step back from someone who sexually abused them or physically abused them? We would. So in order to, and typically when you pull away from these type of communities and these abusive people, all of a sudden that that spell, that's what I call it, that they have on you, it starts to dissipate and you start to see, now wait a minute, what was
Yeah.
I, what I mean, allowing in this situation. um be open to unlearning some things. A
Hmm.
lot of us, like you said, it's a learned behavior generationally.
Yeah.
A lot of us have I'll put it on me. I didn't realize I had codependency tendencies. So this
Hmm.
was easy for me to stay in these environments. I didn't realize that I wanted spiritual parents so they can give me guidance for my life because I didn't want to do it myself. I rather somebody
Wow.
else guide me. So I was really vulnerable at that point.
Yeah.
I didn't know that I felt like the only way I could live out my purpose on this planet if I was under spiritual parents. So I
Hmm.
continued to stay in these environments. So this is what I'm talking about, unlearning. We're going to have to unlearn some behaviors that we participated in to cope. And now we're going to have to learn new ways of dealing with the trauma effects and relating with ourselves and relating with other people. And like I said earlier, find a community, find people. Like I said earlier, Surviving the Black Church is open. If people feel like, hey, let me check this out, we're just getting started. So um,
Hmm.
be patient, but we welcome you to come in. And, I hate to put the disclaimer on it like this, but this space is for us and by us. There are so many different groups out there for other ethnicities and races, and they talk about spiritual abuse, and I'm a part of them. But we
Hmm.
wanted to create a place where our experiences, how we go through a lot of things that may look different, where people can feel comfortable and feel like they can safely talk about these experiences. So it is for us, it is by us, but
Yeah.
hopefully it will help people find those communal type of environments to heal in.
Well, you have helped us so much tonight, and I really appreciate you, Nikki.
I
You know,
appreciate you, Bridget.
you and I were supposed to do this back in June,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
we didn't get to it.
Mhm.
But God's timing is everything.
Mhm. Mhm.
And we've had so many different things happen since June. There's different um, preachers have said things and done things to make us kind of go, what?
Right.
Wait a minute.
Right. Absolutely.
And so it just kind of, I think this is the right time
I'm
because
pretty sure it is. Mhm.
and
Mhm.
God's timing is always right.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
but we really appreciate you, Nikki. And guys, please check out Surviving the Black Church on Facebook. So
Mhm.
just send a request to Nikki, and you have a few questions to answer, just to make sure you're the right fit for the group.
Yep.
And yeah, and so we're really excited about that. So, Nikki, do you have any more you would like to share with us?
Um, if anyone feels like, hey, I would like to connect with this young lady here, she's been yapping the whole night, so she seems to know a little something, something. And you're saying, hey, I think I need someone to process some of this with. I think I need someone to walk me through it. And it's not just dealing with the trauma effects, it's now learning how to live life a different way from critically thinking. Some of
Mhm.
us are so dependent on leaders that we forgot how to go up here and go in here to get the answers for our
Mhm.
lives. So
Amen.
it's teaching patterns to be able to honor ourselves, to love ourselves. So I have packages, I have services for people if they're interested in my coaching regarding spiritual abuse, narcissistic abuse, or cult
Okay.
recovery. And I will be hosting a course in October, and
Okay.
it's called Removing the Narc Mark, talking about the narcissistic family systems, because it starts in
Wow.
the family, and a lot of times those
Mhm.
family systems cause people to feel familiar with cultic and abusive type of systems.
Mhm.
So we're going to go into a lot of things to actually look at the narcissistic family tree, what that looks like. There'll be some handouts, some slides, some group connections. So if you're interested in that, go to nikkigspeaks.com. There's a pop up window. You can put your email in so you can get more information about the course. It's will be held in October. So
Okay.
looking forward to. I'll take DMs in Facebook as well or on my website, and my clubhouse clubs. I don't know when, trying to get everything together. Probably will be in
Mhm.
September when I do some clubhouse rooms again, but people are welcome to find me on Clubhouse, Spiritual Abuse and Cults Club. So
Okay.
mhm.
Wow. You're amazing. You are absolutely amazing. And I really appreciate you being here. And God bless you.
Thank you
You're
so
doing a great job. And, I'm so sorry you went through all that you've gone through, but I know that your test is now your testimony.
much.
Yeah.
And thank you, Bridget, for what you're doing. Like I said earlier, this is important work. It's time that we get courageous and help the survivors. And we may get some kickback for it, but that's okay because at the end of the day,
Yeah.
it's the broken, it's the bruised, it's the hurting that need the recovery and the repair.
Amen.
Hmm.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye bye.